I just want to do a quick video with a personal story of why the fifth step checkpoint is so important. This year, I coached an athlete who is a natural jumper. Probably could have won almost all of the meets he jumped in had he actually hit the board. On average, he probably only had one board per meet, and we worked on this religiously. And I continued to provide insights and talk to him about things. And it wasn't until I decided that I was no longer going to watch the board, but I was going to watch just his fifth step checkpoint. And from that, I was also going to communicate to him where he was at. If he was good, I was going to say something like jackpot. If he was over, I was going to say something like you got to get going, turnover. And if he was behind, I was going to say you got to push out. Okay, something along those lines. And those cues may not work for every athlete, but I decided no longer to watch the board because I knew this athlete was, a great jumper, not the greatest landing techniques, but ultimately it was more about just getting him on the board. And he had scratched some massive jumps throughout the year. So getting him on the board could have resulted in, really big things. And by the end of the season, which is when we finally decided to kind of make this transition, he started hitting, two out of three boards, which was huge. So we practiced this a little bit here and there. And at that last meet of the year for him, I did not watch the board whatsoever. I had someone else up there watching just to tell me where he was at. And he had some of the best boards of his entire uh, season, but also probably career, and more consistency just by me using those cues at that fifth step. There was one point where we decided to move him one shoe back from his original start. So again, just to make sure that everyone's clear, I also then altered his checkpoint to be a foot back as well because I didn't want to lengthen out the start to change things. I wanted to continue working on things that we had talked about at practice. And when we had him move and we moved those things, I mean, he was lights out. He was hitting the board just about perfect pretty much every time, with his last jump being all adrenaline and going over, unfortunately. But in terms of consistency, if you have an athlete who's really struggling, not only should you do the fifth step checkpoint drill a lot at practice, like I advocated for in the book, but you should also change your thinking about what you really want to watch during a meet. Do you really need to watch the board? Do you really need to watch flight and landing mechanics? If you feel like your athlete are good at those things and all you need to do is help them with getting on the board and they're not consistent there, then why not go back and watch their checkpoint? And I know this is something that coaches have used for years. I just never have. And so I recently saw, it was at the track clinic this year in Wisconsin, a collegiate coach talking about his checkpoint and using it more for himself to kind of know. I think he said he may have communicated to athletes, but he's a collegiate coach. And that's kind of how I saw checkpoints. I know checkpoints are used a lot at the high school level in pole vault. I've seen it done a lot, but I've never really seen coaches stand back and watch a checkpoint and communicate that way until I saw that video from the collegiate coach. And at first I just simply said like, no, that's still just collegiate in nature. But this this change towards the end of the season that I had with this athlete to watch the checkpoint, to communicate to them in real time in the pit or in the lane, excuse me, prior to getting to the takeoff location, the board, made a huge difference for this athlete. Again, I'm not saying it's going to be for everyone. Some athletes don't really necessarily like to be yelled at or hyped during their approach, if you will. But it worked out great for this athlete. So again, I just want to advocate that you think about what you really need to see. Do you really need to see if they hit the board, or can someone else do that for you? Do you need to be over by the pit to see flight and landing mechanics? For some athletes, yes, you definitely do. But for those that have inconsistent approaches, standing down there at the board, watching them scratch, and then do flight and landing that don't really matter anyway, considering they scratched. Should you really be down by the board? And so this has actually challenged my thinking quite a bit this year. And I love that I had the opportunity to change my process and to build a new routine with this athlete because it paid off huge by the end of the year. And so that's something I simply wanted to provide an insight with, a quick reflection, just for you to think about where you might really truly want to stand or be at during competition.